各位研究生，哎，那里哦，你躲在那里啊？胡老师啊，哦，廖老师，还有谁躲在里面？还有哪位老师躲在里面？OK， 好盛大哎。所以今天还有各位研究生这个今天很荣幸呢，我们请到这一个环境与资源经济这个大师级的这个Professor Alan Randall 但是美国俄亥俄大学的这个知名的学者，那这种机会非常少非常少，能够来到台湾能够来到这个中部，真的是超级难得超级难得。那这个 Professor Randall 呢，他有非常多重要的著作，其中一篇呢，就是我讲其中一篇就好。所以那边在1983年的时候呢，在这个 AER 呢，他证明了这个单阶二元选择的这种评价的方式呢，是会让人们说真话的让受访者说出他心中真正的价值。所以对受访者而言，是讲真话最有利，你不需要高报或者低报。所以这是他的其中一篇研究。那当然他有几十篇、上百篇研究所以非常厉害的一位大师级的学者。那好，我就不要占他太多时间不要占各位的时间OK， 好的，让我们来欢迎这个 Professor Alan Randall。好，来鼓掌，谢谢。
So it's your turn.
It's my turn.
Yeah.
And I've got to do it in Chinese. So I didn't hear what he said about me, but I'm sure it was all very kind, and I appreciate the introduction. This is actually my second visit to Taichung in the university. The first one was 25 years ago. I really can't remember a whole lot about it. At the time, one of my former students was playing host. This is Hui Yan. Yeah. Right. And of course, that was probably her first name, and I'm probably still acting like the teacher. So, she was my host, and I really enjoyed time with her and time with the students. Now, I'm looking out, most of you seem to be students. Is that fair? Students in graduate programs. So that I can try to talk to as many people as possible. If I talk to, I mean, be speaking about things that you're alert to and interested in. Let me ask if you had a course on sustainability or some in-depth discussion of sustainability in your environmental economics or resource economics classes? Not so. Oh, okay. Well, all right. So I'm very blind. This is.
We have a landmark evaluation course for PhD students, but not all of them have taken this course.
Okay. Well, I have done some non-market evaluations, but not in the last 10 years. So, I now work in the Sustainability Institute, part-time. I've been retired for a while. I've retired twice. Retired from Ohio State University in 2010 and University of Sydney in 2014. Now I'm a part-time resident scholar in the Sustainability Institute. And I came to talk about sustainability, and I came to talk to people who knew some of the discussion in sustainability and what's it about. And I wanted to make some points that are sort of interesting in the sense of a new article that's come out that's going to explain the whole thing. Sustainability is difficult. Economists probably deserve some of the blame. Maybe they made it difficult. We're going to show you how to explain all this stuff to ordinary resource managers. That, I think, was kind of the point. And I wanted to react to that some from a background of a lot of familiarity with the economic discussion and sustainability. I think we can still do it, but it'd be good if you would tell me any way you want it, by raising your hands or whatever, when I start saying things that you've never heard of before. So I don't really want to go there and leave you behind. That's the key point. We're all fine with the machine and the volume. I can't tell whether it's working or not, frankly. But are you hearing me? And that's all good? Thank you, thank you. Well, let's move into it and see how it goes. Where am I going here? I'm going forward right there. Okay, when economists talk about sustainability, they quickly gravitate to one or other of two concepts, and that's been true for 40 years. Lots of detail has been worked out in the interim, but for 40 years there's been two big concepts of sustainability that economists comprehend. The first one is, well, what we're going to sustain as a matter of policy, national good intentions, better yet global good intentions, is human welfare. So the whole structure of sustainability thinking will be about how we can sustain human welfare as all the things happen in the world that happen. Technology develops, tastes change, population may continue growing. Some of our natural resources are exhaustible, and as those diminish with use, we're still going to somehow sustain welfare. And to do that then, we could handle technically in our heads the changes in what we consume and the changes in how we produce it by saying, well, it's all about that future generations will be as well off as us. It's not exactly the same as saying they'll be as happy as us, but it's more like it than you'd really want to think if you're an economist. So economists are a little bit jumpy about there's a relatively new field of happiness studies, which relate a lot to our concept of welfare, but not exactly. So we're going to sustain welfare, which means sustaining consumption bundles which would give future generations the level of welfare that we have, even though the technologies will have changed, things will have become quite different, but there's some sense in which they will feel as well off as we do, is the idea. And it makes intuitive sense because it's hard to predict what technologies will bring in the future. Anybody that's lived as long as me has kept adding things to our technological arsenal. The idea that I'd do as much on something which has replaced the telephone and is in fact a small computer in my pocket was not something I was planning on 25 years ago, and etc. So the goods and services we'll consume will be different, but somehow they'll add up to as much welfare as previous generations had, or as future generations will get, is the basic idea. There's some fundamental theorems of intergenerational justice which are based on that proposition. A policy projected forward is intergenerationally just if no generation in the future will have less welfare than we're enjoying today. That kind of idea, that somehow we can make these comparisons. Not only that, you can get on the web and you can look up lots of numbers that are addressed to that. The World Bank does something called adjusted net savings, that they monitor for Now it's more than 200 countries. For the countries with better statistical records of economic activity and environmental quality and whatever, those data series now are of the order of 50 years old. And national net savings are defined as gross savings, which is what we think of as just savings, that the economic statistics have reported for years, but then we start making adjustments. We subtract depreciation of manufactured capital as factories get older and stuff like that. We subtract reductions in environmental quality. If pollution is increasing, if carbon is increasing, there's a subtraction from the national savings that reflects that. We subtract the reduction in stocks of exhaustible resources, minerals and the like. Subtract or add, depending as the case may be, whether our stock of renewable resources is larger or smaller. And in the end, one more thing we add typically, an increase in the stock in human capital, which is proxied by how much money country after country spends on education at every level. Okay, so there's something called this national adjusted net savings data for hundreds of countries, year after year, that is supposed to keep track of how we're doing with this welfare thing I'm talking about. And it's interesting reading. Those numbers bounce around. It doesn't just get better every year. Some years it gets markedly worse, whether it's a change in the economy or whether something's happened in the way of a natural catastrophe. But those numbers move around a bit, and there's just a basic theorem that says we cannot meet the intergenerational sustainability criterion of that no future generation will be worse off unless our adjusted net savings are non-negative. They've got to be at least growing. I'm sorry, the change in adjusted net savings over time has got to be zero or positive in order for there to be a chance of maintaining welfare in the future. So that whole welfare tradition, it goes by the name of weak sustainability. Well, what's weak about it? What's weak about it is that from the perspective of our friends who are ecologists and engineers and this and that, the weakness is it doesn't sustain anything in particular. That is, we're imagining that we can somehow sustain whole bundles of things and it'll all work out. Not too much will be lost in the arithmetic in between. The contrast with strong sustainability is that strong sustainability says we've got a problem, say with rare earth minerals, which are important for a lot of the technological devices we use. So we've got to keep track of whether we're able to sustain the stock of those things by really minimizing use, by maximizing recycling, by slowly but surely finding more of them or finding substitutes for them. So the other tradition of the two is this business of sustaining particular resources. Now I've got some of the good things there. That's the case of welfare. Sustaining welfare is the intuition that what you really want to sustain is consumption and production bundles rather than particular things. But for the strong sustainability, particular resources approach then makes intuitive sense because there are some resources that it probably is prudent to treat separately and account for and make sure that we have enough of. There are also in in our whole resource space some unique and precious environmental resources that we might want to sustain just because we care about them without sitting down and budgeting that we need these things for food or for water or something. We want to keep them because we want to keep them. Professor Tseng and I went out to the floral exhibit this morning, and it's interesting how much of the displays out there are about sustainability, and in some cases about unique and valuable resources. And I got exposed a little bit to unique species of frog and wild cat and a number of other things that matter a lot in Taiwan. So that's more the strong sustainability, particular resources approach. But it raises some issues too. It may actually diminish welfare if we become so obsessed with sustaining particular resources that we give up opportunities that might be welfare increasing. And if we make the wrong guesses about what we need to sustain, because we can't really predict future technology or future preferences. Okay, so if you're following me at all and you feel this is all a little bit confusing, that was kind of my point. This is all a little bit confusing, and you've got to spend some time with it before you can engage in the debates that follow from that. So, imagine a well-motivated resource manager who wants to do things sustainably. What are they going to do? This jargon is complicated theory. There are very well-known books. Eric Neumeier is an author who has now got 2 editions of a book that just simply compares weak and strong sustainability and explains all this. But so there's confusion out there, and into that we've got this paper that I'm going to spend most of the rest of this talk talking about. It's by these are the authors, published earlier this year in the journal Nature Communication. Now that journal is meant to reach people from many disciplines. So these guys have got the ambition, they're going to explain sustainability in ways that regular people can understand and take action on. And so that's my starting point. Their case is not the historically original sustainability case, which was an exhaustible resource. This is a renewable resource, but it may experience tipping points. If the resource is pressured to a high degree, it may collapse. It has the capacity to recover, but that's all a little bit probabilistic. In each subsequent period, there's a chance the resource will recover if we leave it alone and if we back off the exploitation. If we pressure too much, it may collapse. If we back off, there's a chance it will recover. Those chances can be represented by probabilities. We can guess, we can guess and gamble, or we can calculate things like after how many periods of zero exploitation does recovery probability approach certain. That if you no exploitation for 10 years, is it almost certain it will recover, or are you still going to have to worry about it? That kind of thing. they write very carefully about something called the agent. The harvest from the resource is something called the reward. Why this? Because they want to address any problem you could imagine. The agent could be a farmer or a fisher, could be a local forestry or fishery administrator, or could be the master of the universe. If we put somebody in charge of making sure that planet Earth survives for many more generations, it could be that person. The only assumption that we really make about this person is that they've got good knowledge and they've got benevolent intentions. They're trying to do the right thing. And if there's knowledge out there, they've got it. That's not the same as they know everything. This is not a talk about somebody who knows everything. They've got the best knowledge around, and they're trying to make sense of that. The reward, depending on the scale of social organization, could be welfare, as we've been talking about. We hope it is welfare for the master of the universe. And it probably really ought to be welfare if it's a forest or fisheries regulator or administrator. Although they could be tilting, of course, toward the forest or fish stocks. But if you had a very isolated society, or a single firm, imagine a pioneer deep in the forest is going to organize some sort of farm or plantation that they're going to be able to raise their family on the things they can produce. It could be something as simple as, well, I'm okay if I've got grain to store for the winter, or I don't know, what's a durable crop in Taiwan that an isolated pioneer way out of the mountains would like to store. That crop would be this person's reward. So it's very, very, very general. All right, this is the picture, and I need to know. It's out this year. I haven't spent a lot of time with the language of weak and strong sustainability. Now I'm going to move to a language of optimization a little bit and see if we're comfortable with that. So we got policies. The risky policy. Oh, sorry, hit the wrong button, but it's all right. We've got the risky policy, which means high pressure exploitation. You harvest a lot. You stress the resource by harvesting a lot. If the resource is in a prosperous state, you've got to back off if you collapse it and put it in the degraded state. Well, there's a cautious policy in which you harvest but at a low pressure rate. Okay, and you do that always. The key variables, all I've done is changed some subscripts of theirs. I've changed to superscripts so that I can use time as a subscript. Okay, our H is the reward from the H action in the prosperous state. So if you don't collapse the system, you earn RH in any period. If you take the safe approach, in the prosperous state, you earn a lesser amount, RL, a lower level of reward. Our min is a minimal acceptable reward level, and I think it's helpful if we think about that as subsistence, that the human population that relies on this resource will have real problems. They'll starve, or they'll have to move away, or whatever, if the minimum reward goes below this R min. So we've got a subsistence level here, and if you fall below that, it's all too horrible to think about, so we don't go much further with that. Now there's some really important probabilities. What's the probability of collapse from the high pressure action in a prosperous state? What's the probability of recovery if the resource is left alone in the degraded state? And these are in a given period. What's the recovery in a given period? If your probability of recovery in a given period is, say, 0.2, you've got a very good chance that you will have recovered after, say, 3 periods. But there's some chance that you may not have recovered even after 10 periods, because this is a roll of the dice kind of thing. And to use language that you hear a lot of in the literature about sustainability anymore, the probability of collapse is a measure of vulnerability. That the resource is vulnerable if the probability of collapse is fairly high. Resilience, so that's a term used a lot by ecologists. But we hear it in other places too. We hear it in infrastructure designers. I'm working back at Ohio State with a guy who's a team who are trying to figure out strategies for resilient seaports. Now, what have seaports got to worry about? They've got to worry about acts of terrorism or war. They've got to worry about sabotage. They've got to worry about hurricanes. They've got to worry about rising water levels. And all of those things they've got to either somehow be able to stay in business in these events, or they've got to be able to recover fairly quickly in the event of some sort of disaster. So resilience is the bit about, can you bounce back from a shock that is really damaging to your whole effort. And so this probability of recovery is a kind of a crude measure of the resilience. So if you've got low vulnerability, your delta will be a low number in that period. If you've got high resilience, your P will be a fairly high number in each period. I'm using T as a subscript, so we say these R's, L's, mins, etc. All of these 5 variables are in a given period, and just for a few things I want to say what about a particular period we'll call T, then, okay. Gamma is a discount factor. You're familiar with discounting. Surely that shows up in some of your courses, that you can calculate present values and think about the meaning of discounting, and what are we saying to the future when we tell them we're going to discount benefits and costs that happen in your time frame rather than ours, etc. Okay? So there are time subscripts, there's a discount factor, and in the end, this thing turns out to be really, really important in this analysis. R here is a stream of revenue, which could be high, low, or something in between, or whatever. PV means that that's been present valued, so that we've followed the stream out for as many years in the future as we care about. We've discounted it according to whatever discount rate we use, and we've got a present value here. Then we bracket all of that and throw expected on it. And that's an interesting thing for these folks to do, because they haven't really raised directly much discussion of risk. It's obviously there. We've not talked about probabilities without it, but we've got this expected present value of future rewards. Turns out to be a really key thing in this analysis. Just lubricate my throat a little bit. But yeah, keep that in mind that this term matters a lot. Matters a lot, and a lot of stuff is embedded in here, especially that we're dealing with expectations for the future, and we're dealing with present value stream of rewards. All right. So this is the result that I should say what they've done. What they've done for us is they throw all of this into a dynamic programming model, and they use some numbers for those variables that I just put up there. Let's look. We'll program this over a range of probabilities of collapse, over a range of recovery probabilities. We'll program it for a range of differences between RH and RL. Is the extra reward for high pressure exploitation really high, so it's hard to resist, or is it not that much, in which case we might be more willing to play it safe? Okay, those are the games they're playing with their dynamic program, and these are the results with a set of values that they say are kind of middling values. Now, my first thought to this is well, this looks like you're looking down on a cone. The worst of all worlds is this flat base, not sustainable, not safe, etc. They designate the gray area there as their sweet spot. It's optimal, sustainable, and safe. And it seems like, well, this is the pits down here. This is the peak. And it seems like you ought to be able to climb up this hill from these directions. And things should be getting better as you approach the center. But I don't actually think it works out that way. It just has that visual kind of look about it. So I'm going to ask some questions about this. They've said it's the sweet spot. What do we think about that? They've specified this acronym here. Say just this thing. Safe and just operating space. That's, you're getting that out of the ecology literature. And what do they mean by that? Well, it has the, if you look at it, it has the characteristics that it's always safe and sustainable. It's not necessarily optimal, but it's always safe and sustainable. And so if you were able to identify a safe and just operating space, and worked in that, then you would know what you do for sure is you know what catastrophe. That much you could do. And so that counts well with them. All right, let's keep thinking here. My first thought about that is this optimal, safe, and sustainable. That could be good, or it could be quite awful, and I'll tell you why. If you say it's optimal and sustainable, and it's safe, you can't beat that. That's got to be good, right? That just sounds great. It's optimal, it's sustainable, and it's safe. Now you say the other way around. You say it's safe and sustainable, but it's optimal, and it's optimal. Then it doesn't sound quite so good, because that's telling you that you can't gain by optimizing. That once you've got sustainable and safe, there's nothing else to gain. And that's the problem with it. And I'm going to spend more time than I should trying to convince you of why I think that way. But to get started, we'll just look at these around here. All around this green, yellow, and that's sort of a red, isn't it? They're green and yellow, they're yellow and red. If we look at all of these, green, we're not sustainable. Not sustainable here. Not sustainable here. These are pretty nasty arrangements, and yet they're quite a way up that hill. There's something sort of odd about that. All right, let's move along. Now, I should have maybe earlier defined the three paradigms for this optimal, sustainable, safe, but it's pretty clear here as they tell us what they're doing. They're maximizing this expected present value that I'm been telling you about. Future benefits, that's optimality. Sustainability, they're maintaining that. And maintaining it above RMN, which I've said makes most sense if you call that subsistence. So it's sustaining that above subsistence. Then the safe, though. Safe is we're permitting only the low pressure harvest action. That seems different. It seems to, it just sort of sounds different in terms of what's the logic behind this. All of a sudden, the safety, all this expected value and present value goes away. So, that's the point I just said. Well, notice the point I didn't say before. Defining optimality and sustainability as expected values means it highlights that there's risk involved. We're not saying a risk-free thing. We're saying that we're going to be dealing with expectations of future rewards. And we're going to say we've achieved optimality or sustainability if we've achieved some level of expectation of future rewards. So clearly some way of dealing with risk has to be involved here. Now, still, all right, that's terrible. There. Safety is different. It's about abstaining from the ill action, but still it's motivated by trying to maintain rewards. They're doing this because they don't want to run out of rewards completely. Now, again, the point here that the decisions are made by an agent, and this agent thing is a very broad view of whoever's in charge of stuff. So we run a bunch of scenarios with their model, and said what we want to look at is we'll have a far-sighted agent. Why do I want my agent to be far-sighted? By far-sighted, that means that individual is not discounting future welfare. That's what that means. Why would I want that? What are the implications let's say, what are the implications if I didn't want it? Say, hey, I don't mind if I've probably got a short-sighted agent. Well, what do you think?
Intergeneration equity.
Beg your pardon?
Intergeneration equity.
Yeah, that would certainly be if the most practical reason for not wanting to do much with a high discount rate is you know the system's going to collapse. You know that people are going to rush to the high pressure exploitation. Already you've got some problem for self-discipline on the manager's part when you've got fuzzy stuff like expected present values. But if you give them, say you're going to be short-sighted, you're going to have a high discount rate. We know that's going to go badly, so why bother with all of the analyses? If I can do an analysis that gets results that are good, we've got something that we can try to learn from. It's just too easy to do analysis where it comes out badly. So that's one reason. The other one is that you have to have that. You have to have an agent who values welfare equally across the generations if you're going to talk about sustainability as we understand it. I'm going to set that at subsistence, and we're going to vary these things. Let's vary the low pressure reward, the high pressure reward, the chance of of crashing the system and the chance of getting it back on its feet. But first, I've been hinting that there's something important about this expectation. We'll really get through it here. The motivation is that these folks want the expectation of future rewards to enter the decision-making of the agent. They want the agent to be thinking about the future as well as about the immediate. Okay, but suppose then some period t, RT falls to 0. Something, you get a collapse at RT in that period 0. What happens? I mean, in the simplest analysis, you have no savings mechanism. You consume your reward every year. Every year you get your reward. You beat your reward. You get a year in which reward drops to 0. You perish. The society really has to perish. And yet there will be 0 reward years or periods in any solution that is not strictly safe. And so to find any virtue in non-safe rewards, you've got to, non-safe strategies, sorry. You've got to have some way to get over, get through, get around these 0 reward periods. So how do we do that? Well, I already blurted out one of the answers. Maintain some savings. If you maintain some savings, you can still continue to consume. Have you guys had a course in risk management? Or does risk management come up in some of your other management courses? Well, what are the classic ways of managing risk? I was always taught, and I always understood well,
Sure.
there's three ways to manage risk. You can go out and buy insurance. You can self-insure. Now, self-insuring, having savings, is a good form of self-insurance. Another good form of self-insurance is diversification. You can try to organize yourself so that you've got several streams of rewards. They don't have to be huge. I'm not saying be 3 times as rich. I'm saying get rewards from 3 different places that have different collapse probabilities, etc. Okay, and then self-protection, which is, the classic example of self-protection is sometime during the dry season, take time to mend the roof, because the wet season will come eventually. So you can do that. There you're doing physical kinds of things to make the risk go away. Now, you may not appreciate this. You haven't been around universities for 60 years or so like I have. But I always thought there were 3 kinds of risk management, until I went over to the business school at Ohio State. Over there they talk a lot about a 4th risk management strategy. So it's insure, self-insure, self-protect, and in the business school, it's the 4th one, which they, I think, put first, is transfer the risk. Find a way to make the risk somebody else's problem. And of course, that's what's happened to us, to most of us, in America at least. The big change in the last 40 years is that pension funds have been converted to investment accounts where the risk falls upon the worker rather than the company. So anyway, right. This is all nonsense unless we get really, really serious about managing these risks. is a key point that I want to bring in here. So I better keep moving. Since I'm going slower, because I think I need to, somebody better tell me when I've got about 10 minutes to go and I'll try to put it together. Right, so you've heard of the Thomas. Where am I going? Where am I going? Where am I going? Yeah.
So the reward here, sorry.
Yeah.
The reward here is what kind of reward? You mean the social welfare? The reward. How do you calculate the present values of reward? So what is the reward?
The reward's anything.
Anything.
It's social welfare, money in the bank, grain in the shed, and the storage bin. Right now, it's really, really generous.
So it could be happiness or anything satisfaction or.
It could be happiness, I guess, if happiness is something that can collapse when the resource collapses. I suppose it could. It would. Yeah, it could be anything. Although I think it helps us at some point to start getting specific. But I think during the setup of this, it could be anything. Let me start there. No, that is a point here that I've got. Yeah. What I wanted to draw your attention to is certainty equivalence a term that you've encountered in class? Okay. This expected present value thing. If you make a series of bets or investments which have an expected present value of 0, which means that you're expecting that your wins will cancel out your losses, and you'll have a lot of fun, but in the end, you'll still be able to put food on the table and do other stuff, right? Now, a way to do that, assuming that you're gambling with fair odds, so that fair odds just means that gambling redistributes among us in the classroom, and there's nobody sitting up the front taking a profit from every bet. Okay. So if you do that, and you follow the rule that you only bet a very small fraction on any particular bet that you place, a very small fraction of your total wealth. Okay. And that you're going to make many bets. So you make many small bets. And small is relative to your reserves of money. Thence, you'll come out almost as though this is certain. That's the idea of certainty equivalence. That with small bets and fair odds, it's like this was certain. In the real world, a lot of things are not certainty equivalent at all for us. We as I would imagine in Taiwan, like every other place I've been, we insure our vehicles, our motor vehicles. We buy a car, we buy insurance. It's not even a fair bet. The insurance company encounters some costs and bills us for them, makes some profit and bills us for that. Why do we do it? Because the things that can go wrong in an automobile could be no small fraction of our wealth. These could be quite devastating. So driving around saying, "Hey, if I get a ding in my car, it'll all average out." No, we don't do that. We buy the insurance. So a lot of things in life are not certainty equivalent. I want to make that point that we've got a certainty equivalence assumption here. So, all right. So this is the second time "Let's Move On" has popped up there. So let's really do it. All right, so so I'm really hammering away here at we need effective risk management. Savings is a mechanism. There are other mechanisms. So with that, let's look at this. We'll look at optimal, sustainable, and safe. Safety permits only the L action. I was hitting the wrong buttons again. For here, this I just meant optimal, sustainable, and safe. All three. SA is safe. O and S are optimal and sustainable. Safety permits only the L action, and that limits the gains you can possibly have. You can never get the RH reward, but it could be a good living. And on the other hand, if L approaches the subsistence level, it's clearly a pure poverty. It's a poverty trap. You can work a long, long time and not expect to escape from poverty. And I hit the punchlines too quickly, but those are those. And this is I'm not joking with you, it's good to be born rich, because that really is what you have, a society has to be in order to be able to commit to really low levels of exploitation and enjoy a high level of welfare year after year. So I mean, this is a rule for a rich society, optimal, sustainable, and safe. Societies that or people or whatever that are not quite so well off probably are going to have to gamble a little bit in the hope of being able to escape out of the poverty trap there. Now you go to optimality and safety. Well, we've got optimality. What can we do with safety? How does safety improve optimality? Well, it certainly prunes, gets rid of, eliminates the optimal solutions that avoid collapse. How can optimality improve safety? Well, by identifying the best of the safe solutions. But neither of those ensure that the society would not perish. You could have years in which it might. So you've got to have the sustainability constraint. So that's a clear conclusion. Then, if we've got that, is that enough? Optimality is subject to a sustainability constraint. The sustainability constraint assures that we'll achieve sustainability as long, again, as we've got this risk management business built in and taken care of. They say, yeah, this is sort of interesting. They say that that the sustainability that they're talking about resembles weak sustainability. If you've been trying to publish research for years and years and years, you click on words like resemble. Resembles came in because they said this is weak sustainability, and a reviewer at the journal said, no, not quite. It's not exactly, so you escape by saying, well, it's kind of like, and that's sort of what they're saying there. So in the absence of risk management opportunities, if you are in this isolated area, I mean, I've read some stuff about the pioneering farmers in Greenland. They encountered all kinds of, their renewable resources turned out to be not as renewable as they thought, et cetera, et cetera. And that was a case where an attempt at building a civilization there failed because they really could not maintain a sustainable kind of development. So I would never rule out a safety constraint in blanket fashion. There's no excuse for a safety constraint ever. I think there are in lots of particular cases. But then the case for a general safety constraint is not that good either, because the general safety constraint puts those who start out with limited resources in a very difficult position for escaping from that. Now to the weak and strong sustainability stuff that the literature is full of, and you may well encounter subsequently, even if you haven't heard of that stuff yet. Weak sustainability is concerned with sustaining welfare for people. It's not sustaining the resource itself. When I say our authors claim cross-scale generality, what they're claiming is that it works for planet Earth, and it works for Fred's farm, and it works for everything in between. But if you think about that, at smaller scales, isolated firms and communities, you may need to think about sustaining the resource itself. I haven't talked enough today about what I mean by diversification. If you live in a diverse economy where people get their income from lots of different sources, there's just lots and lots of things you can do to get the aquaculture farmers through a bad year. You can have banks that might make loans. You can have governments that might vote to do disaster relief programs. There's lots and lots of ways a diverse, well-articulated society can protect somebody who might suffer a resource collapse. Whereas if you're suffering a resource collapse like the pioneers in Greenland, and you're on your own, that's a very different sort of thing. So that's what the comment about scale of organization is about. Oh, this is going to be too much. It refers to the fact that there is a modest cottage industry, a few dozen economists who make their living proving theorems about sustainability. One of the classic ones is something called the Hartwig rule. And the Hartwig rule is if you've got non-negative adjusted net savings, basically, assuming that we get adjusted net savings right and all the accounting is perfect. If you've got non-negative adjusted net savings, then you've got, at least you're not unsustainable. You've got a good shot that you might be sustainable. If you've got, this is as a nation or whatever. And that's all calculated and easy to prove for an economy with manufactured capital and an exhaustible resource. But we don't have the theorems yet, and maybe never will have them for a complicated portfolio of different kinds of resources. That's what that's about, and you don't need to. There will not be a quiz at the end of this discussion on that. Okay, and here's some literature that tries to make sense of that. Well, back to that again. Here we go. This guy suggests that portfolio theory might help. Why not get the right kind of mix of exhaustible resource use, renewable resources, investment in your human capital, sending your kids to great universities to learn this kind of stuff, etc. Okay, there's Chang who says, well, you know, maybe what we want to do is a safe minimum standard for the renewable resource. He might have been reading stuff that I've been writing since the 1990s that says exactly that. Okay, we could adapt this readily to strong sustainability, which is the business of protecting at least some resources directly. That we've decided that a particular resource is a problem and we're going to have programs to protect it directly. If we view it as essential and in imminent threat, that means urgent, that we've really got to worry about it. We may invoke strong sustainability for ordinary, I say prudential, this means being sensible and cautious. The distinction here is, I'm not imagining a resource lover, like you might imagine for a specially treasured piece of the environment. Every country has places they think are special. But I'm not imagining a resource lover here. I'm just imagining people who want to live well and who are worried they can't live well without this particular resource, so we've got to treat it pretty carefully. Australians, many of them think that way about water because it's a pretty arid sort of a place. Okay, so then you might manage by what's essentially a safe minimum standard. If the probability of recovery is approaching some really low level, then you'd want to set the probability of collapse at 0, and use only VL actions. So that would be a safety constraint or a safe minimum standard. Let's go. Yeah, that's what I just said. This is the case of the unique valuable resource. We think that it's special, or we think we have. Today we had. Is it officially an endangered wildcat? We certainly have a low population of the wildcat, right? Is it designated as an endangered, threatened species? Okay.
You mean a rock? You mean a rock? Rock tiger? Rock tiger.
Yeah. What?
A medium size.
Yeah.
Out of the cats,
out of the floral exhibition, there was stuff about
Yes.
the wild
Right.
cat. I did give the right name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here. Yeah. Yeah. Is that under government protection, or is it?
Yes.
It is. Right. Okay. So that's what I'm really referring to here. Cases like that where we probably, I could be saying something absolutely wrong, but we probably don't see the, is it rock tiger?
Mm-hmm.
We probably don't see the rock tiger as an economic resource, except perhaps that people like to see them and know they're there. We don't think we're going to put them to work or start eating them or something or other, probably. So the idea of sustaining them is motivated more in the second category of aesthetics, ethical principles, etc. And that's very consistent with the precautionary principle. Okay, so I end up saying a safety constraint makes sense only when the resource is essential and or unique and or highly valued. Potential damage is disproportionate. I mean, high damage, the proportionate idea is high damage for relatively small benefits. Don't take really big risks for small gain. That's the point of disproportionate. The threat's urgent when you've got large threat of collapse and small probability of recovery. Those are the cases when safety makes sense rather than as a general rule. And so I work on this thing for a month or two, and I come back to a position that I've already taken in print in my book on risk and proportion a few years back. So we are at the end of it, pretty much. I obviously haven't bought into the bit that optimal, sustainable, and safe is the sweet spot. And I think the safe and just operating space really needs to deal with the fact that it makes conservation a rich man's game. Because you have to be well off to enter a game like that. And so I've got those problems with this article. I think they're big problems. But having played with it for a month or two, it is interesting. You can build a good sustainability story from this discussion as well as building it any other way. Because in short order, I've started with their assumptions and showed you how to derive weak sustainability, strong sustainability, the precautionary principle, the safe minimum standard. They're all there. I don't know if the benevolent resource manager that our author was trying to help feels better off for knowing this. But I was kind of interested in that. I thought it was interesting that you could take a framework like that and think about how it might be a little bit different and come up with pretty much all of the principles we use as economists in the sustainability domain. There we go. Oh, yeah, this is just stuff that isn't perfectly well done yet. We haven't got the, certainly haven't got theorems on sustaining multiple kinds of exhaustible and renewable capital. We've got sort of the equivalence problem again. There's some extensions you could easily do that are easy analyses to do, and I've sort of done them in my head without putting them on paper. Suppose the probabilities are unknown of collapse and recovery. That is, you know it might collapse, you know it might recover, but you really don't know those probabilities. Well, you can learn something by testing the system and seeing what happens, which is a common sort of thing. And there's a series of natural resource problems where it may be optimal to put more pressure on a resource when you don't know its vulnerability, because it's valuable to find out. It's only when I learn more about those probabilities that I can sail close to the wind, play the game of saying, I'm going to get all the expected value I can possibly get out of this resource by taking risks with high pressure harvesting, at least sometimes. Right, so there's a benefit from learning more about those probabilities that might lead you to test the system a little bit more harshly than otherwise. And again, if this was a situation where collapse would be devastating, it would be a reason why we might want to move to a safety constraint. Say, I could see guys poking the system and seeing how it reacts, but they may collapse it for all of us. One more. Yeah, with the poverty trap thing, certainly we could help societies where low income is an issue if we're able to develop innovations that reduce vulnerability, the probability of collapse, or increase resilience. Perhaps it's more likely to go that way that a lot of work is being done on trying to increase resilience of natural systems. And then there's the business that these guys, for simplicity, set H as some number and L as some number, and said you've got to choose L or H. Well, you know, the high level or the low level, rather than get out there and try to optimize the level of harvesting pressure. And in what I thought was a pretty likely sort of event that that the reward goes up with harvesting pressure and the probability of collapse goes up with harvesting pressure. So you got these two things, and you could play with that, and perhaps rather than H or L, find a level of harvesting pressure that's optimal. So those are obvious extensions. You have survived. You've heard everything I brought. A little more explanation than I might offer a group of people who'd spent 15 more years than you studying this stuff. But I do hope that some of you will get into the business of working towards sustainability through research or as resource managers or whatever. I hope that you hear a lot more about sustainability and what some of the possibilities are in the future than you've heard to this time. Thanks for listening. That was better up before. We'll worry about it later. So, are there any questions or thoughts or comments?
有没有什么问题、建议或批评？或鼓励，或者回想？
Okay, I'm thinking, I'm trying to think if this, today, the renewable energy,
Yeah.
which is a very hot topic, can apply this OOS framework. So like,
Yeah.
for example, in the United States, there are at least 80 cities that are shooting for 100% renewable energy self-supply, using the term resilience of the city. For
Yeah.
example, Berkeley and many other cities, even Salt Lake City, they have said in targeting 2030 and 2032 to 100% renewables. And I think that applies to this case, your theory.
Yeah, I'm sure it would.
What about minimum, the safe? It's hard to explain safe though.
The only reason I'm having trouble answering that I can think of is that renewable energy is such a broad category of kinds of energy. Changes all the time. The increase of in Ohio, the wind came into in some ways because of difficulties with solar. But now solar technology is improved, and solar is coming back to some degree. And these will have different risk characteristics. The solar, you've got to worry about storage. Wind, the same sort of thing. We also have really old. We also have some really old nuclear plants with different kinds of risks there. That's a good one.
EV.
The electric vehicles, yeah.
Storage.
It certainly would apply. The question is exactly how and to what. That's the bit. But it's a really I don't know about how it is in Taiwan, but in the U.S. These energy markets are distorted in all kinds of ways. Of all the renewable energies you could choose, you would never you'd never start from scratch and decide corn ethanol is the way to go. You just wouldn't do that. But we do lots and lots of it. Why? Because we're in the habit of sending money to corn farmers. The government's been sending money to corn farmers for decades. So we send money to corn farmers for ethanol, and we can't explain why except for that. On the other hand, the latest I hear from the crop scientists is that is the direct biomass crops, not harvesting fruit or this or that, but just getting plants that grow lots of stalks and lots of leaves, and finding the fastest growing ones that photosynthesize very efficiently, etc. Those will form good renewable sources, etc. Something like this, in the business of trying to avoid collapse, that collapse probability is a characteristic of whatever it is you're trying to produce, and it'll be different for different kinds. And I guess in the big picture, building renewables into the system is certainly some kind of insurance for lots of things. For running out, for running out of as the way we think of running out. For perhaps there are things we could do if we had plentiful, cheap energy that would help solve the carbon problem, for example. So there's lots of ways of thinking about how they may work as insurance.
The biomass can be used as a base load, so it does not have the intermittency
Yeah, right.
derived from the wind and sun.
Right, right, I guess.
But it's a trade-off, like you said, the crops and the fuels.
And the business that you can treat biomass as a regular flow that doesn't vary very much. That probably depends on if these are crops. If these are grown as crops, that will be truer in I would guess in tropical countries where there's not much in the way of seasons. You have, in Ohio, you still have season issues. You don't grow much in winter, so you have to worry about that. Lots of stuff, lots of work for people to do when you get down to particulars.
And one extreme phenomenon is that renewable energy in some states like Texas or Southern California, they go so extreme, the large proportion that drive the wholesale market spot price to be negative. That means when you utilize electricity, I pay you money. Is that a contradictory to the sustainable economics?
I have a good friend and colleague who understands the grid and electricity markets. I don't. I know that the Australians, having spent the time in Sydney in the first part of this decade, I was there 4 years at the University of Sydney. And the Australians, I think, have just changed their prime minister, head of government. Might have been several reasons, but problems in the energy market were among those reasons for sure, right up there. So glitches in energy markets, I'm not the person, I recognize the problem. I don't know enough facts or details. But in our research team, we've got a guy who lives and dies by the grid. He's a grid expert, and his students are working on science fiction storage technologies, and it seems to me like they're science fiction, but I'm just an economist. So, yeah.
Probably I miss it or not. How do you define collapse in the model?
Oh, pretty much the way that ecologists do when the basically a catastrophic loss of system function, that it fails to. If it's a plant, that it fails to grow and its seed output, et cetera, et cetera. Oh yeah, I mean, it basically means that it fails to. There comes a point in a series of life cycles that it fails to complete one of those life cycles. Is what it means. Yeah.
Theoretically, I believe the sweet spot, I think it is just like the heaven. I think it's the beautiful place that we are really want to reach that. But from the point of view of government policy, I think there are something is more important than the others. I know 3 of them are all important. So safety maybe is easier to reach, and then maybe sustainability than optimal. So if you are the policy maker and you have to choose one of them, do you really think that they have a causality relationship between each other, or they just they are all important? So we have to do that for free.
No, I would say that safety restricts options. The way it's defined here. The way it's defined here, safety is limiting exploitation, harvest, whatever, to a totally safe level, restricts options too much. We don't really expect people to achieve optimality all the time. We know there's going to be some shortfall in optimizing. Sustainability, I think, that's the one that I would think is most urgent to keep stirring into the pot, adding to the mix. We want more express recognition of the importance of sustainability goals, I think. I think that is really important. The safety argument seems, once I get into it, it hits me, of course, having spent the previous decade very interested in debates around the precautionary principle, that the safety thing is just a reincarnation of the precautionary principle thing. And the problem with it is that it's a very harsh and limiting rule, which doesn't mean never use it. It just means you've got to really be pretty sure you have to. That you don't want to use it for everyday resource management. And that would be where I would say.
So, with the policymaker, maybe we'll think about safety first.
No. Maybe it's easier to have a conversation with a policymaker about safety first. I think they should be thinking about sustainability more broadly.
But do they have a causality relationship? I mean, to reach the safety first, and then you talk about the sustainability later. Do you think so? I don't know. Because I'm not really understand. I try to understand my way. So I think that if I'm a human being, I care about more about myself and safety first. Then we talk about the sustainability for the real world, for the environment.
Yeah, and we certainly feel that way. And there are contexts in which safety first really matters. There are things that there are life experiences that we just plain forego because we think they're too dangerous, et cetera, et cetera. That's all true, but an across-the-board safety rule that says that we will take no risks with this resource that inherently has its risks. The worry with that one is that it so limits the actions we can take and the opportunities that will come from those actions. I mean, if I say something like, I'm going to put more pressure on this resource, and I'm going to try to cover my risk by diversifying, and I know I've got some savings, or I've established a line of credit, or something that, if it goes badly, it's not the end of the world. For us, I don't have to go home and tell the family that we're out in the streets. No, to that extent. But a safety rule would, depending how you define rewards, a safety rule might say, well, diversifying isn't good enough. That's not an answer. Or if you define rewards as I'm sorry, I'm backing out. I'm getting fuzzy here. The safety rule doesn't address reward. So that's the key point. This is what I was trying to say a few seconds ago was really about sustainability when I think about it. Because safety is basically a do not touch or do not touch harder than. Yeah.
Do nothing.
Well, no, do the.
Do something.
Do a safe level of exploitation. That's why I say it's a rule for countries, people, societies that are born rich. That if you can live well without stressing your system, it's a Garden of Eden kind of rule. You can live well without stressing your system. That could be a good thing to do.
It's difficult nowadays.
It's difficult. Well, I mean, if I want to. When I think about the country that an imaginary country that can afford to follow an optimal, sustainable, and safe regime, and I think about the kinds of migration of humans around the world that are likely to be triggered by climate change over the next generations. This country is going to need really, really high walls if it's going to maintain that optimal, sustainable, and safe. It's not going to work for the planet because for the planet, optimal, sustainable, and safe might provide the levels of living that people reasonably aspire to. It simply won't. So, it's a rich man's territory with high fences around it. That's the problem, I think, in the real world. That's
from the point of view.
From the point of?
The planet view, okay.
Yeah.
World.
From the point of view,
Robot, that's it.
we can't do it. It's impossible. It is simply impossible. But I think there are things we can do with sustainability. A lot yet to be done with sustainability, but is, I think, conceptually possible.
So, any more questions?
Yeah.
Oh.
Up to that.
Okay. Professor, I have two questions.
Yeah.
The first one is about, we know everyone got their own spot, sweet spot, right?
Yeah.
So how about if the government try to decide something for the official policy, something like that? For example, recently we did a large scale general public voting about some important issues like renewable energy policy, like nuclear policy, air pollution policy, and most importantly, the homosexual human rights policy. So each one, we all have our sweet spot. So, and the government let us decide what's the general public idea about this kind of policy.
Yeah.
Is it okay to do this kind of voting, general public voting, to decide the future or the future policy for the whole country, depending on this kind of voting behavior? Because we have to, a lot of people, they have to answer their question within like a few minutes, because they didn't read the question before the voting, so they have to do it within a few minutes. So do you think?
So you're asking me, should the government put out to a referendum, resolved going forward our country will follow sustainability policies?
Right. Sorry, can I ask my second question?
Yeah, sure.
My second question is, what's your suggestion about our students here to widen or broaden their sweet spot in the future, or maybe if there is no sweet spot, what's the minimum, the safe strategy or the ultimate strategy for the students they can pursue in their future, because they are still in their very young career age, something like that. Do you have any suggestions for us?
Yeah, those are tough questions, aren't they? The referendum thing, I have a lot of experience with referendums going on in lots of countries going on. The worst case I can imagine is the British referendum on European Union membership. Nobody really wanted a referendum, but a politician offered it to pacify a small minority of his own members. It was announced beforehand that it would be advisory. It happened, they voted to leave the union by a rather small majority, and so politicians immediately jumped up and said, well, the folks have spoken, we've got to do this now. And they had no plan. And so the referendum worked awfully in that situation. Now, whether people of the same sex can marry and enjoy the benefits that society gives for married couples, I think most people understand that, regardless of whether they like the idea or not, they know what it means, which is a little more promising case than knowing what leaving the European Union means. Nobody knew that, and they don't know it now, 2 years later, trying to figure that one out. So one of the things is that referenda would work better for questions which are in some ways simpler. And I think there have been referenda in California. Ohio's a state, my state is a state that has referenda on a lot of stuff. And we've done referenda on particular sustainability policies and animal welfare policies. California voted to something about the size of pens for laying hens for poultry to produce eggs, and they voted for larger cages, that sort of thing. And of course there are some economists who think that was a bad idea, and some who think it's just fine. I think it's just fine. And I think they knew what they were doing in the sense that they understood it was about cages. Now, there have been votes about the level of renewable energy subsidy. There have been votes about the proportion of a state's total energy that ought to be provided from renewable resources. And that's probably specific enough that you could have a good referendum on that. A referendum that says we'll all live sustainably, won't we? Probably meaningless, because there's just too many things that are not exactly specified in that sort of arrangement. So, yeah, I've got some faith in people if the questions are simple enough, and you can imagine a yes or no answer. So many questions don't really have answers in the form of yes or no. They're just too complicated. Now, what can you guys do to improve your prospects for the sweet life? Well, you're doing some of those things right now. Investing in yourself by studying and getting education is a good thing to do. Certainly doing some of that in economics, and in environmental and natural resource economics is a good thing to do. I think again, the prices matter, and I don't know what your situation here about tuition is, but I imagine it's not that expensive to go to the university here. It would make sense that bright young people take advantage of that and do it. It's really worrisome in the U.S. where the large demographic bulge of people born after the Second World War, people born in the late 40s and 1950s, have been able to get everything they want all their lives. They got schools in the 50s, they built universities for them in the 60s. In the 80s, they said, well, we'll give you subsidized low-tax savings accounts for your retirement. So they got everything they want, and a whole new generation of students have to borrow money to pay for their own tuition. It's tougher. Between that and the fact that probably here, and certainly in a lot of other countries I'm familiar with, jobs are changing in serious ways. Not just what you do, but the contract between you and your employer. That you get an annual salary seems to be less likely than it used to be, and that you have regular work seems less likely. All of these things affect, I guess, not only your prospects, but your strategies. How would you navigate? The world that I navigated had more, was willing to make more promises to its workers. That there was a good chance of very regular work under conditions that we could predict in advance if we just completed our studies and got qualified. It may be different now. I have no great wisdom on this, but I can see that there are good things to think about. It's sort of going that way.
Not long.
Yeah.
Yeah, division long.
So I think let me speak in Chinese.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
这个演讲非常精彩，所以那时间到了啊、那大家都可以听得出来，他给了一个很丰富的这个观念的架构啊。我想他收获都非常多。所以我们再次给这个华拜师 Alan 的一首，我们用掌声来鼓励他。好，谢谢。This is a smoking from our department.
Ah, good. Well, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to come. Yeah, right. Okay, we can hold it. Right. Thank you. Thank you.